The Elder Scrolls 6 is called Sentinel, probably. So let's break down what makes the Elder Scrolls music so good, speculate on what Sentinel might sound like in the final game, and right at the end, I'll make my own fan-made Elder Scrolls 6 track. The music of the Elder Scrolls franchise, and more broadly across all of Bethesda's RPGs, is totally iconic. But what makes it really interesting in the context of the game is that 9 times out of 10, it's effectively trying to be invisible. The core goal of the sound in these games is to add space and texture to every single interaction the player has with it, whether that's a walk or an exploration or a fight or a conversation. The score has to hide in plain sight for most of the playing time, and that is a really notoriously tricky thing to do. If you've played any of these games before, then you know that Skyrim especially masters this. Each track is a sweeping, massive orchestral piece, and yet it sounds so minimal and well-toned that it forms part of that scenery, blending into the world rather than being a kind of added on top thing. To me, this is what I call sound as emotion, which is a massive trend now in film and TV scoring. You can watch any of my other videos to see that. But film is really taking a page from gaming here, because games had to master this long ago. The invisible emotion needed to be there because the player has agency. It's something that doesn't happen in filmmaking. I'd ask you to compare something like Jurassic Park and Skyrim. Both use very similar orchestration. They have those big kind of sweeping melodic lines, similar instrument families. They use the Western orchestra. They use heavy strings, nice bold brass underneath them. And if you listen to the standalone tracks, the underlying feelings are pretty similar when you hear them next to each other. Yet in situ, Skyrim's Gerald Mountains track, for example, seamlessly kind of mingles and blends with all of that lovely kind of texture around you. It fills the void that is made in the space without overstating itself or taking the attention to it. Meanwhile, Jurassic Park, by contrast, totally relies on its soundtrack for spectacle, foregrounded spectacle, literally blaring that main theme as the character stares down the barrel of the lens and says, "Welcome to this movie." Skyrim achieves its magic by rigidly following the architecture of the space. We would call it, in film, we'd call it following the picture. It sticks to the picture really well. And yet in games, because of the depth of that picture, the breadth of that picture, it can sit in space in a different way. You can notice elements of design and architecture of the cities, for example, playing into that music to make it a natural extension of Skyrim the place, echoing through the valleys and the peaks all around you, not just an extra bit of music that hovers on top. The game adds to this by including dynamic changes. So as the player takes action, the music changes with it. When you enter a fight, the game will throw you fight music and build up that tension, and then release it once the fight is over and the threat is gone. Looking back from 2026 at this 2011 game, it's the subject of a lot of memes, and this is especially primitive in Skyrim, but equally, even in its primitive state, it manages to capture the emotion of each scene as the player takes us through it. Skyrim comes out right at a time where this dynamic mixing is really important in gaming. Red Dead Redemption 1 also has a very similar thing, but it mixes stems in and out of the music. So you can have one stem playing, which then is heightened by another one. So the drums come in when the mood takes it. And these dynamic changes following that player's action are key to keeping that score almost invisible most of the time you're playing, because they're mapped directly to the ludology of the game, the playing of the game. Before we get into some speculation about Elder Scrolls 6 Sentinel, it'd be really hard to discuss this without explicitly addressing the upcoming change of composer. So after a long stint in the composer's seat, Jeremy Soule has been left behind for Elder Scrolls 6 due to alleged allegations of serious misconduct. And while we can enjoy the art and love the music that Jeremy Soule's created, we have to remember who he is in that experience. And no art or music will ever be good enough to justify the direct suffering of other people. So I think personally, moving away from Soule to protect others is an actually really good move from Bethesda, despite the musical achievements he's made. And it sounds like in place of him is Inon, who is no stranger to Bethesda, no stranger to their RPG style, and is usually locked in the Fallout franchise until Starfield shook that up, of course. And they're two very similar games musically, actually. And I think demonstrably in all of Xur's work before, much like Soule, he's able to effortlessly fit his music into the world around him. His choices in Fallout 4 stand out as a really good example here. That gorgeous minimalist style with the piano ringing out with reverb as you're walking through central Boston. I mean, it's just beautiful, and it perfectly maps to how the character would feel in that situation. The music of Diamond City in particular, I spent hours in Diamond City just exploring every single nook and cranny, and that music is super powerful with its warmth and its community, and it adds so much to that feeling of exploring that city. Pardon the reference, you can really genuinely feel the world of Fallout, the wasteland rebuilding and renewing, getting better, and that sense of community helping each other. You can feel it in that music. I think with Xur's exceptional ability to build tone and weight, as evidenced in all of the games he's scored before, to then give him a full fantasy sweeping orchestra with real epic kind of depth, I think we're going to be great. We're going to be fine. It's easy to fear what we might have lost without Soule. But in an era of franchises spanning decades, I mean, this one taking longer than Todd Howard's entire career before this or whatever, remixing other composers' work for the sake of a franchise is just commonplace now. It's just everyone has to do it, and Inon will smash it. Right, let's get to the meat of it. So, Elder Scrolls 6 Sentinel. For a game rumoured to be as vast as this, we can probably expect a metric shit ton of music. Skyrim's released soundtrack, which, as with most soundtracks, and as I mention every time we talk about this, are usually truncated, cut down to be better for album listening. So the released soundtrack of Skyrim ran for just under 4 full hours of music, right? We can anticipate significantly more musical content from Xur this time around, not just because of the size of the map, the scale of the thing, but also games just have more music and design in there now than 2011. That's just a newfound fact. That's why they're 6,000 gigabytes just to be able to play the new Call of Duty. Now, as for specific content, it's very, very hard to tell this far out. We still don't know anything about the game pretty much, and a lot of it is totally kind of speculative. What we do know for a fact is that original teaser trailer track was a mock-up by Inon, a really cool gig if you can get it. I would love to do that. But we don't have any listenable examples of the actual score yet, or things that it's going to use. What we do know is that the game Sentinel is probably set around Sentinel, covering Hammerfell and High Rock around the Iliac Bay. So that gives us a clear few leads to go off with our musical speculation. Hammerfell is home to the Red Guards, so it's heavily based on North African, Middle Eastern and Moorish cultures. North African and Middle Eastern influences pop up all the time in film and game scoring, and it's one of those things where most of the time it pops up, it's usually a token gesture to prescribe an ethnic feeling, and I use that word heavily in air quotes, with things like military games often leaning hard into that trope. So I would expect Inon to be delving deep into research to try and capture the true essence of this style without falling into the tropes. It's worth saying that the real-world regions that Hammerfell references are super rich and diverse in terms of being a mixing pot for historical and musical cultures. And they're quite well documented. Ancient Greek and ancient Egyptian musical traditions are pretty well documented in our history, all things considered, given they're thousands of years ago at times. And this is true also of the Arab Islamic conquests that happened in those areas. So we have quite a lot of documentation about each culture and each part of this musical mixing pot, dating back well into history. This also travels right the way up to the European and colonial influences that then come in later, which obviously come with their own baggage. So what I'm trying to say here with this massive list of things is that Xur has an incredible array of instrumentation and harmony to explore here. The existing lutes and things like that from the canon of the Elder Scrolls already offer a pretty good bridge into the oud, which is a predecessor of the lute from ancient Arab cultures. There's some really, really lovely wind instruments that have loads of expression to them, like the kawala and the ney, both of which just sound lovely and have a really nice kind of resonant timbre to them. You also have the kind of droning double reed instruments, so the things that we've heard in Odyssey, so the aulos, for example. Very common geographically in that area are double reed instruments like this. So you could get some of that real kind of scratchy depth that we get in Goranson's score for the Odyssey, for example. And this is one of the kind of unspoken but really fun, amazing parts of being a composer, is that hopefully Bethesda has thrown a bunch of money at Xur to go out and immerse himself in these cultures, to really explore and collaborate with talented local musicians from the areas he's referencing. I mentioned the European colonial influences earlier because High Rock is associated with feudal medieval European culture, which is interesting because that is mostly, I mean, obviously there's Nordic influences in Skyrim, but you've got a lot of that in the kind of Cyrodiil exploration tracks from Oblivion. So it could be really interesting to see the friction of these two kind of musical cultures colliding in the music that we hear. It gives Xur an excuse to do the straight cut European orchestra music that we associate with the franchise already, whilst kind of attacking it or mingling with it, or, you know, following the story as the two kind of cultures blend. It would be silly to speculate about this without looking at how the regions already sound in previous adaptations. So we've got Redguard, Daggerfall, Arena, and ESO are the main ones. And honestly, the truth is, the tech just wasn't there for half of these to meaningfully explore this. Like, Arena has very brief kind of 10-second jingles at maximum as you enter and leave a town. And it honestly sounds like the composer in the 90s was going, well, let's just go as Arabic as we possibly can, because that's all we need to do to sell it. So I'm hoping that we get to go a little bit further than those explorations. Daggerfall played it kind of straight dark fantasy. You can almost listen to it now as a dungeon synth album. It's awesome in its own right, but it's not particularly good at exploring this region. There's definitely more depth in ESO, in Elder Scrolls Online. It offered a bit more depth in that exploration. So tracks like Sands of the Alakir stick to that kind of established orchestral language of the franchise, but those really nice, interesting regional wind, percussion, and string instruments start to creep in beneath that main kind of lead. And while it's interesting, it's still very much the Western orchestral templates. It's, let's open my game scoring template and write some music on that. So I'm really excited to see if Xur does some proper kind of dedicated musical exploration in this next chapter. So ultimately, the Elder Scrolls excels at building tone and vibe with its music and supporting that player's journey, mapping to how they play the game. Elder Scrolls 6, I'm sure, will be no different, even with a new composer at the helm. while we don't have all the answers yet, that cultural groundwork promises something really special when picture the game design, the architecture, and the sound all align together to pull us back into Tamriel. I'm also really hoping that Bethesda releases some really good behind-the-scenes content detailing Zura's process. They released some great stuff for Starfield from all of the art designers, and it would be awesome just to see his process through this game. It must be a monumental thing to do and just take up so much of your life and time. Anyway, so that's my thoughts on Elder Scrolls 6, and it wouldn't be a fun video for me if I then didn't also put this into practice. So I riskily, given that Bethesda haven't hired me and probably never will, I've had a go myself at doing a kind of exploration track turned main theme of the Elder Scrolls 6 Sentinel. Totally fan-made, so have a little listen, see what you think. Have I matched what I've talked about? Have I fit the vibe? Does it make you more excited for Elder Scrolls 6? I don't know. Let me know what you think.